The summer before my junior year in high school, I got the opportunity to take a trip to the other side of the world, known as the Philippines, with my grandma. Not only was it my first time out of the country, it was the first time I had ever been on a plane, and the first time I had to say goodbye to my parents. To make it even more memorable, I got to spend an entire 2 weeks with my grandma and be the only person in my entire family to visit the places where she grew up. Being the first time that I'd ever flown, I didn't know what to expect. I was a little nervous, and the fact that I'm claustrophobic didn't help. After boarding the plane, I was relieved to have a window seat and enjoyed the view out of the window. I even made a little icicle friend. When we landed for a layover in Japan, I got my first dose of a different culture, even though we were just in the airport. My stay there was only long enough to use the bathroom, which was funny because I'd never seen such a crazy toilet. But following the landing in the Philippines, the bathrooms and toilets were even more foreign, and I immediately had no idea what I'd gotten myself into. When we arrived at the busiest time of the day, about 11 p.m. It was so hot there that even people who had lived there their entire lives waited until after dark to come out and play. It also didn't help that we got there right at the end of the dry season, with one of the record heat indexes. I thought Georgia was humid, but I'd never experienced anything as hot and humid as it was there. Not only was it so hot, the first place we stayed was in Quezon City. It's a suburb of Manila and is jam-packed full of people living in cement houses with tin roofs. Another thing that I immediately had to get used to was sharing a small space with people that I'd never met before. The first night there, I shared a non-air-conditioned room with 5 people. Before I went to sleep that night, I was starving, and being the hospitable people that they were, they had food freshly cooked just for us. And I was excited when it was something that I recognized from my grandma's cooking. Pancit, one of my favorites, was plopped on a plate just for me. After a bite or two, I looked more closely and I realized there were some ingredients that weren't so familiar, like chicken, heart, and liver. Not only was there chicken, heart, and liver on my plate, but I looked over to see my grandma, just munching on a whole roasted fish. The first day I got to the Philippines not only opened my eyes to a whole new culture, but a whole new lifestyle as well. It was the day I became a vegetarian. Luckily for me, there was an abundance of white rice and fresh fruits and veggies. Since my grandma had only been back to the Philippines twice in the last 40 years, all of her family members were so excited to see her. And not only did they come from everywhere to visit, but we traveled to see them as well. I've never seen or been in such poverty-stricken areas in my life, and staying the nights in places that didn't have real walls, any air conditioning, or plumbing really made me appreciate what I've always had. One night, I stayed a sleepless night in a house in the middle of nowhere with fighting chickens that were raised just outside and just clucking away right next to me. The heat eventually got to me and I got run down and sick. My parents joked about me going to see a witch doctor and were surprised how cheap the doctor visit was and how educated the doctor was, even though it was in such a poverty-stricken area. When we left that area, we went to stay on to more luxurious and tropical places. We went to Cabancalan to visit a family member that my grandma had never met before, and her house was beautiful. Even though it didn't have any air conditioning, her tropical open house was one of my favorites that we stayed at, and the fact that she had so many helpers or maids that waited on me all day made it even more enjoyable. Another one of my favorite places we stayed at was with my grandma's nephew who was working on a campaign for presidency. Although they had money and could afford air conditioning, they still only had their bedrooms air conditioned. But I enjoyed staying with them because they spoke English as their primary language. Little did I know that when we were staying with other family members that this little girl made fun of me because of the way I looked. She thought I looked funny because my nose wasn't flat. But their kids loved me and spoke English and asked me all kinds of questions, so it made it entertaining for me to be around them. Another thing that Uncle Alex did for us was take us around the city and feed us American food. I got to see the college that my grandma started off at, the University of the Philippines, and we ate pancakes at the Pancake House. Even though I was sad to leave them, the place that I left them for was pretty cool too. Nelson and Patty are not related to my grandma, and she actually met them when she lived in Michigan. We stayed in their 4-story pink house in the tropical Tecate City. There we saw an island volcano and attended church. They also tried to make sure we got to see a lot of things before we had to leave, and they even let us stay in their condo in Manila before we had to get on the plane to go home. Going home was a little bittersweet. I was getting used to all the helpers that lived with everyone, and it had even cooled down. A lot, actually, because the rainy season had started. I experienced drought weather and monsoon weather. One day we were just shopping, and the next thing you know, I was walking in like 5 inches of water. The experience was awesome, and I think another reason why I wish we could have stayed longer was because, although I enjoyed taking off and landing on the plane, I wasn't particularly excited about being on it for another 24 hours. When we finally got back home, I was exhausted and lazier than ever. I couldn't sleep on the plane, and the jet lag almost killed me, literally. What I thought to be just sleep deprivation turned out to be the swine flu. You can thank me for bringing that back to the States, I guess. In addition to being sick, I was used to people doing things for me and wanted my mom to do everything for me. I was annoyed when I actually had to cook my own food and do chores again. Luckily, I survived all the crazy changes that I experienced the 2 weeks I was in the Philippines and the 2 weeks that I returned home. The experience is definitely something that I would not change for the world. I got to see a whole new way of life and form a stronger relationship with my grandma. What more could I ask for?